President Trump has reportedly told aides that he's willing to end the U.S. military campaign, even if the Strait of Hormuz remains largely closed. That report is in the Wall Street Journal. It comes after Iran attacked a fully laden Kuwaiti oil tanker that was anchored at the Dubai port, damaging the hull and starting a fire on board. For more, let's get to Bloomberg Horizon's anchor Jumana Basechi in Dubai. And Jumana, another day of having to weigh up these conflicting messages from the White House then. On the one hand, threatening all kinds of damage at civilian infrastructure, and then hours later, the Wall Street Journal reporting that he's considering calling things off, even if the Straits of Hormuz are not opened. What do we make of the latest news lines?
That's right. Once again, a lot of narratives emerging out of the White House and indeed from President Trump himself. But I want to take you back to the Truth Social post that he put up yesterday afternoon, afternoon regionally. He said that they were in discussions with a quote unquote more reasonable regime and that a deal will be shortly reached. And then he says, after which, if the strait is not immediately open for business, we will conclude our stay in Iran by blowing up, obliterating power plants, oil wells, and Karg Islands. So here, in this specific Truth Social post, he's making a linkage between a deal for the war and the reopening of the Strait. Now, fast forward overnight, the Wall Street Journal reporting that actually he is considering options to wind down some of the military activities and operations and then deal with the Strait at a later point. So thus making a dissociation between the two. So it is unclear at this point whether he thinks that the two issues now need to be wrapped together or whether he sees them as separate topics that have to be resolved independently. Now, when it comes to the military operations, the U.S. have painted a picture of success. President Trump has said repeatedly that they have made substantial progress. And even yesterday overnight, in an interview the Israeli Prime Minister gave to Newsmax, he said that they've accomplished more than 50% of what they set out to achieve. At the outset, remember, they set a time frame of about 4 to 6 weeks. That is also the time frame that is referenced in that Wall Street Journal article. And the feeling from the Trump administration, as per sourced in the Wall Street Journal article, is that if they were to set about forcefully reopening the Strait, it would significantly extend that timeline. Now, the issue is, ultimately, what the article suggests is that Trump would have to lean on some of the European allies and Gulf allies to help find a diplomatic solution to this. But a solution in which Iran still effectively controls the Strait or vessels have to pass through the Strait and pay a toll is not something that's acceptable for many Gulf nations. And indeed, they've been quite vocal about that. So it is unclear at this point whether any other nation in the world would subscribe to that outcome. But at the same time, on the ground, all of the actions suggest further military escalation, as we were talking about, with the deployment of more ground troops. And overnight, the U.S. actually targeting a key industrial base in Isfahan as well. So it could go both ways in the coming days. But this is the first time we hear an perhaps explicit reference of Trump looking to dissociate the Strait from what they're doing with the war.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to get, that news directly from Trump himself out of the White House, making, possibly some progress on the talks. We're a little bit captive to, geopolitical events here, as far as headline risk. So, as goes oil, so goes the stock market in the opposite direction. So we're definitely trading off of that. But, any progress we can see on those talks, any progress we can see on, possible opening of the Strait of Hormuz or, ships getting through is good news on that front.
Well, it's different, right? Because we've been seeing that, what you said about oil and then the market's reaction. Today is different. Oil's up and the markets are up. Does something have to give?
Eventually, something would have to give. We'll have to see how everything plays out this week. The Pakistanis are obviously getting a lot of countries together in the Middle East to have discussions on this issue. And we'll have to see how it all plays out. But it's good to start out the week on a solid positive note. Again, we have seen this kind of bounce up and down as far as positive and negative headlines. But it's great to start out on another Monday on a positive note. So we'll just have to see how it kind of plays out the rest of the week here.
Palantir is one of your picks. I want to talk about that. But is this the buying opportunity when you see that the major averages, for the most part, are down 10%, that correction level territory, the S&P a little less, but the Dow, the NASDAQ, the Russell, the transports are down 10% from their highs. Is this a buying opportunity right now?
I think it is. I mean, you can never really perfectly time a bottom, or it's very difficult to. But if you look at the fundamentals of a lot of these companies that have been sold off, including in the tech space, and if you're a long-term investor, I think it's a great time to get in. I mean, you've got to ask yourself a question. Do we really think that we're going to be dealing with this geopolitical situation, 6 to 9 months from now? I think that answer is no. So I think you're getting these great companies at great prices. So yeah, I would be a buyer here.
So why a name like Palantir? Obviously it's had a great run recently too, right? I mean, well, actually it's pulling back a little bit, but over 1 year it's up 55%. Why Palantir now?
Yeah, it has been sold off a little bit with a lot of the software names and the tech names and the AI trade. But it is a company, both its enterprise and government business look to be somewhat insulated from, the AI scare. The AI is going to eat all software. So, it's one of those companies that is actually, working with the LLMs and working with AI, as opposed to, possibly being overtaken by some of the, enterprise software names we think of, Salesforce, Adobe. That's a little more risky on the spectrum. So it does trade at a premium multiple, but the story looks great on the long term here, especially with the AI theme expected to continue expanding.
Yeah, I mean, what about AI, other names? What about tech overall? Do you like the group?
I certainly do. So, there are many names out there that have been sold off with this, recent downturn. So, I mean, even a classic name like the big juggernaut Nvidia, I mean, it's trading at, 20 times forward earnings. So, it was just probably, gosh, I don't know, a year or two ago that we were trading at 40 times earnings on that name. So that's come down significantly in valuation. And the long-term runway, I mean, we can't get enough compute power out there. So the demand is just insatiable. So yeah, there are plenty of names out there. Alphabet's one as well. But the entire space, to me, speaking broadly, looks really good.
Denise, in your view, is this a turning point? Is this a buying opportunity when it comes to tech?
Yeah, when you look at the data, I mean, there's certainly concerns around the technology sector since it's been such dominant leadership in the markets. But it's interesting, when you look at the mathematical setup, we saw this very, very briefly in the tariff tantrum last year, but the sector is now in the bottom third of its cheapest when you look back to the data since the 60s. And we haven't really been this cheap from a valuation perspective in over 10 years. And look, I mean, there's always the potential that it could be different this time or there's a value trap, but there is a very linear relationship between the cheaper this sector has been historically, the more likely it is to outperform. 70% odds are not 100% odds, but the risk reward when you take a 1 year time horizon, I can't say if the bottom is in right now, but when you take a longer term time horizon, it does look more like an opportunity. Now that those 70% odds are actually sticky, even if things like operating margins decline or earnings revisions come down, which is kind of a mathematical way to say whatever it is that you're worried about might be partly priced in at this point.
I think what people might be concerned about right now, Denise, is that this sell-off looks a little bit different if you peel back the layers of, quote unquote tech, because there's this worry about AI and the idea that AI will lead to the demise of some in the software industry, the so-called SaaSpocalypse. Where are you seeing deals? Because just because we're seeing something is relatively cheap doesn't necessarily mean there's opportunity around the corner.
Right, to your point, in terms of a value trap. Now, look, I'll let the fundamental analysts tackle what will happen to software from a long-term perspective. But when I look at the data, you see something very rare historically. You have an industry that's never been more profitable. pinned to the 100th percentile of their profitability. And yet, what we've seen over the last 3 months only has been a devaluation such that relative forward PEs are now in the almost the bottom decile. So you have this massive disconnect between the valuation and the operating profit. That is rare historically. When you look back in all industries to the 60s, you only see this happen 2% of the time. The instances that it happens are things like the financial crisis. So one of the ways that we can sort of tackle this quantitatively is to say, well, it is different, but we have seen a little bit of this movie before. In some ways, software is going through its own great financial crisis pricing. Now, how has that worked, historically speaking? Now, N is only 2%, so you can't draw broad conclusions, but we have seen this historically in technology sectors like communications, comm equipment, and hardware, even though we haven't seen it in software. We've also seen it in semiconductors when you look back historically. And it's, in some ways, the odds from a go-forward perspective, once you're priced like this, what are your odds of outperformance over the course of the next 12 months? And what's your average outperformance over the next 12 months? Is, look, it's only 50-50, which is hard to say that that's a table-pounding buy. It's not. But it is to say that the average outperformance of all these sectors is around 0 in the sense that they tend to be at the point where much is priced in and downside might be more or less limited.
Denise, I do wonder. Yeah, go ahead.
The technology sectors like semiconductors and comm equipment have actually had higher odds of outperformance, which gets to a little bit of what Chair Powell was talking about, which is technology as a sector has a history of reinventing itself. And yes, there may be, in fact, bankruptcies within the software industry, but there might be companies that are actually coming in to create new products as well.
I understand the urge to use history as a guide here. But I do wonder, for those of people who are out there who say, wait a second, we are on the verge of a new industrial revolution. We are seeing something with AI that we've never seen before in modern investing and in the modern economy. Do you have to throw the history textbook out the window, or the markets history textbook out the window in an environment like this?
Well, I'm always struck by the fact that it is always different this time, right? COVID was very different, tariffs were very different, and yet the patterns are very sticky. I do think that there's always a knee-jerk reaction behind, equity markets need to be reflective of very good times in the economy or no existential risk. But when you study history, you see over and over again that sometimes the market goes up and climbs the wall of worry, despite whatever you are worried about ending up coming to fruition. And I do think that what is the definition of this cycle when I look at the math is that the equity market has remained much more fearful on an ongoing basis than we see in most credit markets, which tend to be the smarter markets. More you see that fear and that knee-jerk reaction, the more likely the market is to be higher, not to say over any 3-month time horizon, but it is to say over any long-term time horizon. So yes, could it be different this time? But I think history shows you that those differences might end up being tailwinds that you don't suspect, like productivity, like higher GDP growth, like higher earnings growth, like more profitability in the overall market as well.
I'm taking a look at WTI crude. It's up to $102 a barrel. Brent is at about $112 a barrel. To what extent are high energy prices a drag on the tech industry?
On the tech industry, in some ways you can think of it as a cyclical industry. So I think it's pro-cyclical in the sense that it's tied to the U.S. economy overall. I mean, energy prices are interesting in that I understand why the knee-jerk reaction is to look at real energy prices over time. And we've seen them spike in, obviously 1980, and even the high in 2008 from a real inflation-adjusted perspective was actually higher than the peak in 1980. So you draw those peaks and you say that there's real very strong correlation to very uncomfortable economic situations. But it is quite different, right? History can show you what the similarities are and also the differences, which is to say that oil intensity has actually declined substantially in the overall economy. So that effect on the same price might actually have a much less impact than you think on the overall economy. And in some ways, to think about it in very practical terms, instead of just oil prices, to think about the stress that it could impact on corporate profits, specifically when we're talking about equity prices. If you renormalize those oil prices in relation to corporate profits, you'd see that spike in 1980 effectively was $1,000 in terms of the price per barrel that it would take to equate the same stress, which is not to say that higher energy prices don't take a bite off the U.S. consumer. They do. You see declines in real income growth, and especially over the short run, demand is relatively inelastic. But what you do see is, I think that the comparisons to the 70s and 80s of stagflation, this is a very different economy, and it might be much more absorbable than you think, which might mean, back to technology, that more of that is priced in than you may think.
The president has been very successful until recently, as you just noted, at verbally intervening to dampen crude oil prices. And it's not just that the president has made reassuring comments and so forth, but you got to remember, going into this, no one expected it. No one expected anyone would be allowed to shut down Hormuz traffic for 2 or 3 days. Rapidan did. We had analyzed it in detail back in June. So we weren't surprised, but most folks were. And they expected it to end soon. It's like a nightmare. It's something, it's so horrible, it's hard to even contemplate. You think it will never happen, and then it does. And so when the president would come out and say, look, this is going to be over soon, we're going to have a ceasefire, talks are going well, everyone's relieved, and everybody wanted to trade that sell-off, right? Because 6 years, Martin, 6-7 years, the smart money was to lean against an oil price spike due to geopolitical disruptions risk, like in Russia in 22, Abcake 2019, the June attack last year against Iran. All those spikes faded. So I think you had a market that was ready, willing, excited to sell the top, and it was encouraged when you'd see this verbal intervention. But as you noted, Martin, this is starting to wear off now. Now the market's starting to say, show me the barrels. I want to see ships going through Hormuz. I want to see a ceasefire. I think verbal intervention's wearing off.
Okay, verbal interventions are wearing off, and I know for a fact that you think there is really no realistic, viable path for a ceasefire in talks at this point. If that is the case, right, oil continues to be constrained or choked. It also gives Iran, or rather through its proxies, I think more worryingly, the Houthis down south in Yemen, the opportunity to, I mean, they've already fired missiles at Israel, we know, and folks are worried about the next risk could be they target Bab al-Mandab. And if that is the case, right, this would be sort of a pincer movement, not just oil through the Strait of Hormuz, but also down south through Bab al-Mandab. I mean, technically, it could go north as well up the Suez, although it's got to be on smaller ships and tankers. That's going to be, I mean, oil is still going to get out, but it's not going to be, you know, the 7 million barrels a day that East-West pipeline is at capacity at, right?
Right. So the pipeline's 7 million barrels a day, which is amazing that the Saudis were able to bring that up so fast from 5. However, the real constraint is the export terminal at Yanbu, which is max 5 million barrels a day. And as you noted, it's tough to move that north through Suez. You have to offload it, put it through the pipeline, and then reload it. So about little more than 2 million barrels a day. The way to do it is you flow that south now, 4 million barrels a day through Bab al-Mandab. But if the Houthis, who've decided to join the war, at least formally, move beyond striking Israel and are successful at either disrupting that tanker traffic through Bab al-Mandab, which is sort of the last and biggest workaround from Hormuz, or if they're able to hit the Yanbu terminal or the pumping stations on East-West Pipeline, this would sort of remove the last hope. But, you know, I think we're going to march higher in prices until one of 3 things happen. We're going to have a ceasefire at some point. We actually think that's the most likely scenario, but not near term. And then we could also see no ceasefire, but the U.S. military, it's going to take a couple weeks, is going to degrade Iran's ability to threaten Hormuz and sort of forcibly reopen it. That's another scenario. If neither of those two work, then the sad scenario is the price will continue marching higher until it causes or contributes heavily to a recession. And that's often the way oil price spikes end in history. It's not a pleasant way, but one of those 3 ways is the top.